Hi everyone, what's up? Josh here from Alternative Brewing. And if you're doing your research, you've probably come across the fellow Ode brew grinder. This is that go-to for serious filter coffee brewers with swappable 64mm flat burrs. Although the latest V2 burrs certainly perform really well for filter coffee, it has a large capacity, it has the sleek looks. But let's be real here, it's not exactly budget friendly. So if you are lucky enough to have the budget for the fellow Ode brew grinder, just do yourself a favor right now, skip the rest of this video and grab the fellow Ode brew grinder. Otherwise, we're going to be looking at options that still pack a punch when it comes to grind quality and filter brewing, and also manage to slip under 450 Australian dollars, which does seem like so much money compared to when you actually buy a filter coffee brewer being like a fraction of this cost. And it's tricky. You see, basically any grinder, you take the cheapest in our store, it will grind beans for filter brewing. But just as there are grinders that are ideal for espresso brewing, there are grinders even within the budget category that have specialized for filter brewing specifically, not just ticking that box on breaking up beans. So on the deck today, we're taking a look at the Baratza Encore, the Easy Presso ZP6, the Kinu M47 with pour over burrs, and the Varia EVO hybrid hand grinder. Let's go. Now, each one of these grinders does bring something different to the table. Like the Encore is an absolute workhorse of a grinder, whereas the Kinu is more of a precision tool. But all of them have something that will up the flavor of your brews. And this was a long thought out process, which grinders should make the list. And there are certainly some honorable mentions at the end of this video. Here I had to consider all brew methods, unlike espresso just being espresso. I also wanted both manual and automatic grinders, and I wanted those grinders to stand out from literally every other grinder within the price range. So let me take you through now what I think of each of these four. Let's begin with the Baratza Encore. This grinder must be familiar to so many people. Here I've added the single dosing hopper as an additional extra. It's not essential. No, actually scrap that. I would say it is. You're going to be single dosing after all, and this acts like a bellows system to help remove retention from the grinder. Plus you'll also be single dosing so we can RDT to minimize static within the system. And truthfully, both static and retention are mild issues with this grinder. However, it has long been a choice as a great home grinder for decades. And it has stuff going for it, like the reliable stepped grind adjustment. And you can throw a lot of hate onto stepped grinders. I'm one of them, but it's usually when in reference to brewing for espresso. When it comes to filter brewing, I guess we're not minutely changing the grind to gain an extra 2 or 3 seconds on our flow rate, because that's where stepless grinders shine at. So the Baratza Encore's 40 stepped grind adjustments actually suits our needs quite nicely. If you only brew with one method, say it's your V60 or the Mocha Master every morning, then I think changing the grind regularly really isn't in your repertoire, and it benefits from having distinct and reliable grind adjustment references to come back to. And the Encore has a 140 gram capacity, and a large capacity is an absolute must if you're making large filter batch brews. There's no way I'm grinding out 2 lots of beans every time just to make one batch. And if you're not taking into account the fellow Ode, then the Encore has the best capacity out of all these grinders. Now, I would also mention the Baratza Encore 38P in this conversation, though I do think it falls off the wagon a little bit for grind quality, turning things a bit muddy in the cup. So it's a pass from me on the Encore 38P. The Encore, this uses 40mm conical burrs, though I would say that the RPM on this grinder is working slightly against it. The burrs spinning at 550 RPM is a little too fast to really see the benefits with conical burrs. Yet, if you can get past the retention and the static that seems to plague the Encore grinders, then this is a good choice for someone brewing large batches of coffee. Let's now take a look at the Kinu grinder. Now the Kinu is the most expensive option I'm sharing with you today, and it does also have aftermarket filter burrs assembled within. So this takes what is an extremely capable espresso grinder. I mean, I place this up there as one of the best hand grinders of all time, and then go ahead and place a specific filter burr inside, and I think you're in for a real treat. Of course, its downside is that it is expensive, and it is a hand grinder. Yet, as an anecdote, in this comparison, I would probably happily choose to drink coffee manually grinding from the Kinu over that of using the Baratza Encore, unless I was doing batch brews, as the Kinu's capacity is only 30 grams. But it does have fantastic grinding speed and it grinds very smoothly indeed. Now, its grind adjustment is not stepped, it's stepless, where you have a lot more play in the grind settings. I'd say you're still likely not to move around with it too much, and that's okay, as you can lock the setting in with the top nut. Now, I'm not here to talk about espresso brewing or all-purpose grinders really, but I can't ignore that you will have both a great espresso grinder with the espresso burrs as default, as well as a filter grinder with those filter burrs purchased afterwards, if you go down this option, which isn't bad then for the price. As well, these burrs are a fantastic 47mm conical burr where you will have control over the RPM for quality grind output. And I think that's all I really want to say about the Kinu, as it is the most expensive option here. Let's now check out the Varia EVO hybrid grinder. Now, the Varia EVO hybrid is another mixed bag like the Kinu. Similar capacity, 30-35 grams, although here you have the option of going automatic with the motor installed on top or manual. Again, not the cheapest option out here, but it's almost like a mini powered version of a Varia VS3. And if you're familiar with this channel, you know how much I love the Varia VS3. What you have in the EVO hybrid is basically a powered down version of the VS3, still using 38mm conical burrs that are in fact the Hypernova burr set from Varia. So these have a unique geometry that promises high uniformity, which is a better grind quality than a regular set of 38mm burrs. And these turn at a very slow 80 RPM. And this further increases the quality output that you get with conical burrs. Now, 80 RPM, this is about half as slow as you would get if you were just regularly grinding with a handle. And that's where we lose about half the crowd here. Now, I get it, some of you are way more happy to get faster grinding speeds at the expense of quality grounds, and it's each to their own. The grind adjustment, this is stepped, but where the Encore has 40 grind settings, the EVO has 140 grind settings. So you'll find the adjustment to be very easy to follow though, and not missing any precision that you may be after. And that, coupled with the great burrs at 80 RPM, is why I think the Varia EVO is a great choice for filter brewers. Just be ready with the manual crank, perhaps even practice with it occasionally, so that one time that you do go to use it and it's run out of power, you're not bitterly disappointed at having to manually crank to get your fix. Yeah. Let's now check out the last remaining grinder. And finally, bringing it home, the EasyPresso ZP6 Special. Now, before I go any further on this grinder, I want to point out a striking resemblance between the ZP6 Special burrs and the Baratza Encore ESP's own M2 burrs. Now, the ESP is a grinder that is utilized for espresso as well as filter, whereas the ZP6 Special is filter only. And the filter coffee, I would say, definitely tastes better from the ZP6 in my opinion. And here I would point out, it's probably the RPM of the burrs having this effect on grind quality. Now, I'm not saying that they're identical burrs, but they look it. And the RPM on the Encore ESP is 550 versus that of hand cranking. That's anywhere, say, between 120 to 180 RPM on the ZP6. And here I would say again that I would happily brew coffee with the ZP6 Special over that of the Encore, with quality grinds and flavor being that priority that I think is far better overall. With that being said, you've got a similar grind capacity than all the other hand grinders here of 30 to 35 grams. And the ZP6 Special has very smooth grinding action, and it has my favorite grind adjustment of all time. Up the top, an exterior collar here that has 90 grind settings on it. Now, it won't do espresso, but it is well known for the clarity and transparency in the cup for filter brewing. So in summary, how do I see these grinders stack up? Well, the Baratza Encore is great for beginners. Really, it is an entry-level quality grinder that is great for batch brewing and filter-only enthusiasts to get started. Whereas the Kinu M47, this is the most versatile grinder here. I think it's ideal for advanced brewers who are chasing precision. And the EasyPresso ZP6, This is a fantastic grinder and it is perfect for clarity-focused filter brewing. If you don't mind that manual effort, that's no real effort at all, and I love the grind adjustment on this Easy Presso grinder. The Varia EVO, a hybrid option with excellent precision and dual power modes. Plus those burrs moving at a slow 80 RPM if you can wait for it to grind the full dose. But alone, none of this really does tick all my boxes. I want to know which one makes the tastiest coffee. So let's dive in now and do a blind cupping across these grinders and see what jumps out at us. All right. Whew. I think I've said this before. I love cupping. I love cupping across a range of different grinders. The beans, the coffee I'm using today is a filter coffee that is a Ethiopian natural. It has tasting notes of peach iced tea, berries, rock melon. So there's a bit of texture in there. There's a bit of syrupy sweetness kind of coming in from the rock melon, peach iced tea. There was definitely some like apple acidity coming through, crisp apple acidity. I didn't really taste the berries so much, perhaps the lingering aftertaste. To save a little bit of time rather than go through every single cup, I've just divided my favorite 4, my least favorite 3, and the ones that kind of just sat in the middle. They didn't belong up here, nor do they belong up here. They've got a little bit of everything, but they're not shining. These guys are shining up here, and these ones down here are just dull, boring, not much to them. So just quickly, also, through grinding, what I've done basically is the 4 grinders, I took a average grind setting across the full range. So for example, the Encore, I used a grind setting of 8, 16, and 24. So something you would use for say a single pour over or maybe an AeroPress, to something you would use like in a 2-cup V60 or pour over, and then certainly at around 24, just under even, it was probably like your Mocha Masters. What's noticeable with all these grinders, and I think just grinders in general when it comes to filter, is there is a very narrow window in terms of the reality of what grind settings you can actually use. Like I talk about how Evo has 140 grind settings, but the reality is out of 140, the first like 50 or 60 are dedicated to espresso. And then from 60 to say 120 is your filter settings. So it's really narrow. There's only 60 settings out of the 140 that you would in reality use for filter brewing. And really that is across pretty much every grinder, and certainly like the Encore, for example, it has 40 grind settings, fantastic. But really, you go beyond 28 and it is just chunky flakes of coffee beans, which is just unusable for any sort of coffee extraction. So there really is this narrow window. The other observations I made when I was doing this was Easy Presso ZP6 is by far the fastest and the easiest to grind. Now that's out of the Baratza Encore automated and also the Evo, which we already know is 80 RPM, so it's going to be slow anyway. But the Easy Presso, I could grind faster manually than waiting for the beans to come out of the Encore. And I think there's a little bit of popcorn happening with the Encore, so that's why it takes a little bit longer. Also, I noticed a little bit more popcorning in the Kinu with those pour over burrs. Otherwise, also the Kinu was the slowest to grind, but quite easy to grind. What else was there? Oh, and coming back on the Evo and its grind settings, I actually struggled to grind coarse, like really coarse. Like there is that tight range at its maximum grind setting, which was like 135, 140. It still was, I could get it lined up with the rest of the grinders, but really if I pushed it any coarser with the other grinders, like I wouldn't be able to go too coarse on the Evo. So it kind of has that narrow, like I would say it can't go coarse enough for cold brewing, which is fine. I don't think anyone's using the Evo for cold brewing anyway, but that's enough of that. Let's start with my least favorite. Now I've got my reference guide here, so I've got to keep an eye on. So I've got 3 grind settings across all of the grinders, and I'll reference them to being the finest, the middle, and the coarsest grind on that particular grinder. Yeah, so let's just start with my least favorite, and then we'll hop over to my favorite of the cups, We won't touch these. I haven't really put them in any order. They're all pretty middle of the line, pretty average. This is what jumped out at me. This is what didn't. Let's start. All right, my least favorite cups is the finest setting on the Encore. The finest setting on the EVO hybrid. Whoops, it's a mess. And that was the coarsest setting on the Kinu. That's an interesting span of like fine and coarse. So fine Encore, fine EVO, coarse Kinu. All right, now for my favorite cups. My favorite cups being coarsest setting on the Encore, coarsest setting on the EVO. That's interesting that the finest setting on the EVO didn't really present much, but the coarsest setting on the EVO did. And similar. Well, just, yeah, bizarre. Anyway, coarsest setting on the Easy Presso. And this would be by far my favorite cup out of all of these. It really does shine, is the finest setting on the Kinu. So middle of the range, like I didn't pick any middle of the ranges. These are all basically the middle of the ranges right here. And then you've got fine settings, split and coarse settings. And then you've got fine settings and coarse settings in here. That's really interesting. The Kinu was my favorite by far cup, it seems. Like that just really stood out in terms of bright acidity, juiciness. It kind of had everything in the bowl. And then these were up there, but they didn't quite have just as much as the Kinu did. Yeah, we've got a representation of every grinder up here. There is a favorite cup from each grinder up top, depending on the grind setting, I guess, and the extraction profile of the grinder itself. All right, let's wrap this up. Woo! All right, that was fun. Now, as mentioned, I want to give a special mention to some incredible grinders that didn't make it into this video, but do deserve recognition. Think of all the Time War hand grinders, like the C3, the Chestnut X, and others, as well as the rest of the Easy Presso lineup, and of course, the Comandante C40 MK4, arguably one of the most iconic hand grinders out there. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, how could you possibly leave this out? And you're absolutely right. These are fantastic grinders, but here's the thing, when you really get into the weeds of filter brewing and the workflow that comes with it, I think these grinders that I've selected today truly stand out from the rest of the crowd as the best of the best, both for precision and overall usability. So with that acknowledgement out of the way, thank you so much for watching till the end of this video. If you have any further questions or you would like to add your own experiences in the comment section down below, I would love to hear from you. And as always, keep brewing and I'll see you in the next video.